Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Vision Zero Happy Hour. We're so glad you could join us. We also have some folks online joining us. And we've got Kathy Cunningham here, who's going to do a presentation on her time in Portland, Oregon this summer at Portland State University Bikeway Training. They have a lot of acronyms. So I'll just say bikeway training. And Kathy is maybe about the sixth person that we've sent out there. Most have been engineers. So we're glad to have her and have her give her perspective on it and share what she's learned. We'll do some Q&A after her presentation, so stick around for that. We'll also get some questions from folks online. And there's plenty of food over there, so help yourselves. And enjoy your time. And without further ado, here's Kathy.
All right. Cora, do you want to put it on the slide? Does it have a slideshow setting, or is that what it looks like when it's in the slideshow? Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. All right, well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. It is so great to see you all and to have a chance to talk about bikeways and making it easier to get around our city and neighborhoods and connect people and to the places they want to get. A big thanks to Do Good and Vision Zero for making this event possible, and also to Humble Monk for giving us this amazing space to meet in tonight. I really love it back here. And we also have some delicious food from Melt Revival up on Hamilton Ave. So if you haven't grabbed yourself a sandwich, please go ahead and get one. So as Matt indicated, I'm here to share more about what I learned at the IBPI Bikeway Design Workshop. And we'll get into some general impressions and also begin a conversation about learning more about how to approach and think about some of the issues with bikeway design. All right, so tonight's topics, just a really broad overview, is what is it like to bike in Portland? Because this is a really special place, and not all of us have had a chance to bike there before. This was actually only my second time there ever in my life. And the first time I went there, I was with Fraser. We were visiting a friend, and they're further out east. And so I didn't really have a lot of time to explore or ride a bike around the core area of the city. So this was pretty exciting for me, and Portland may be new for some of you as well. And then to really dive into some of the material, what can we learn from Portland's methods and strategies? And then also to start thinking about how can we translate some of these learnings to issues in Cincinnati. So just a little bit of background on me. I have a really expansive view of bikes. I've always loved bikes. I started riding them very young. And over the years, when I was a kid, I grew up in the country. So bikes to me were all about freedom and exploration. And I have so many wonderful memories of really obtaining some valuable independence through riding my bike. Over the years, when I was in college, I didn't own a car for a period of time. So it was a great way to commute and get around campus and get around town. Eventually, I started joining group rides, which then led to road racing, as they do. And I dabbled in cyclocross just a little bit. Had done a fair bit of mountain biking and continue to mountain bike. Spent about 15 years doing triathlon and also doing some triathlon coaching. Crossed the mountain biking or trail running and got into Xterra events. Really love that, getting to see our local parks. And then have really dived back into urban explorations, especially where Fraser and I live right now. It's conducive to being able to access like really the entire region inside the Beltline. So ramped up the commuting again. Fraser and I are kind of a car light household, so we share one car. We bike everywhere we can and when we can, use transit, combine things up. And so we have our one car, but we try to keep it parked in the driveway as much as possible. And and of course now I'm involved in local advocacy as well. So All right, so just a quick orientation to Portland. It's a historic port city. It's nestled in the Pacific Northwest. Has the Columbia River that on its north, which feeds all the way to the ocean. And you'll see it closer on some subsequent maps, but then there's also the Willamette River that runs through the middle of the city. And just a couple of quick questions just to get my bearings here. I'm curious how many of you have been to Portland ever? Okay, so maybe about half of you. And of those who have been there, have you had a chance to ride in Portland? Okay, yeah, good choice, good choice. Maybe one or two words, like what were your perceptions? Whether you've been there or not, we probably all have perceptions about Portland. I'm just curious what quick words you might use to describe Portland.
Bike traffic.
Yes, yes.
It was the first time I saw bike congestion.
Bike congestion, yes. Yeah, people waiting in the bike boxes.
Bike parking lots.
Bike parking, yes. Yeah.
Like specific bridges, the Tillicum crosses.
Yes, so amazing. Yes, yeah. Uh-huh, yep, part of the picture, for sure. Yep. All right. Well, nobody said keep Portland weird. I thought we were going to hear that as well. But I kind of feel like maybe there's some, valuing of personal freedom and innovation that all kind of comes together to create a special kind of culture. So, all right. And also a quick question is, how many people here are transportation planners or traffic engineers? Okay, good to know. All right. I've tried to gear this to, more of an introductory level, which, would be super, super easy for somebody who's a professional in the field. But I think I'll try to work a nice balance of detail, but then also big picture stuff. All right, so Portland, here's a little bit closer view. Got my pointer here. Here's the Columbia River that you can see on the big overview map. There's the Willamette River that runs through the middle. We've got the airport up here. And kind of at this bend in the river right here is where you have most of that kind of concentrated downtown kind of feel. There's mountains to the west, or big hills, I should say. There are some mountains out here heading out east. And then this tends to be kind of a flatter area that has a lot of residential development. Portland is a historical lands of the Chinook people. It was incorporated in 1851. There had been a large influx of European settlers in the 1840s and after. They experienced some periods of rapid growth, like in the first half of the 20th century. And it has a longstanding identity as a port town. And as we zoom in again, you can start to see some similar features that we share here in Cincinnati. Bridges, the rivers, hills to the west. Who knew? Portland is the largest city in Oregon. It has about 650,000 people, but the metro region is about 2.5 million. So it's sort of similar to Cincinnati, Greater Cincinnati in that regard. It's younger than Cincinnati, but it has a dense downtown, some of the other features that I mentioned. It also has a confluence of interstates, which we also deal with here, and all the river crossings. So are there any good places to ride bikes in Portland? Well, let's take a look. Back in 1980, Portland really didn't have that many places, which I think maybe we can take heart in, because we are dreaming and building more and more bike infrastructure in Greater Cincinnati. But we all got to start somewhere. So this was a sense of Portland in 1980. I'm going to go through a series of these pretty quickly. Hey, Nate. 1985, 5 years later, 95, 2000, they really started swinging. 2005, 2010, another big jump in 2015, 2019, and you can see this where they have this note, better bike lanes. This was really fun when we were out riding. Roadways are replaced often on a 30-year cycle in general. And the instructors we were riding with were like, So that example right there, we wouldn't do it that way anymore, right? But now they're going back as roadways are replaced. They go back and apply their new learnings and knowledge to make them even better than before. 2023, continuing to fill in, continuing to add more features, more protected bike lanes, more buffered bike lanes. And then this figure also shows what they call treatments, which are features like bicycle signals, bike boxes, cross bikes, which we'll talk about. And so at this point in time, they have 115 miles of bike boulevards, which are also called neighborhood greenways, which is what I'll typically call them during this talk. But bike boulevards, 160 treatments, and 436 miles of their overall bike network. The Cincinnati bike page, City of Cincinnati bike page right now is currently sharing statistics of 23 miles of bike lanes and 20 miles of multi-use paths. Now, there's a lot that's going to change in the next few years. There's lots of projects that are like happening as we speak. But it kind of gives you a sense of there's a order of magnitude difference here between what it's like to experience riding in Portland versus Cincinnati. So as I mentioned at the start, this was really like my first time to just really be able to do a lot of riding in Portland. And so as I was, especially those first few days, you know how it is, anytime you go someplace new, you just are kind of flooded with these impressions. And really one of the things I loved most about being in Portland was how empowering it was to be able to get around on a bike, to not have to use a car. So I had left Cincinnati. I used Metro and Tank to get to the airport early on a Sunday morning. I had my backpack and my duffel bag and my bike helmet. Used an airplane, and then landed at the Portland airport, hopped on the bus and the light rail, got to the old part of Portland here, picked up my bike, which thanks to DeVue Good for providing the bike, and then got to the hotel, and I stopped and I was just like, oh my gosh, I made it, and without having to use a car or, the entire time. And like I say, this was all like new, right? So I mean, to be able to figure out all of those pieces the first time, really trying to put it all together, speaks to like actually how possible it is, right? It's really empowering. You can do things that might be just impossible to do in another location. I also found it incredibly welcoming. This kind of blew my mind as I was at the airport, walking under the signs. There's bike assembly area. And I'm like, wow, I love this place, right? Because how many cities, Cincinnati included, you go to the airport and it's like there would be no point in assembling your bike at the airport because you cannot go anywhere from there on your bike, right? So bike assembly area dedicated at the Portland airport. And there's a good reason for that because they are doing some rebuilding right now, but generally I had to take a little shuttle bus because of some of the renovations, but normally you can just hop on the light rail right at the airport, and the light rail allows bikes on the trains, inside the trains. I also just had lots and lots of feelings of liberation riding around. So much of it had to do with the feel of the streets. Often in an urban environment or in a lot of traffic stress areas, you feel that constant pressure. And here, there's lots of cars, but because of the way the streets are designed, you just like, this place is meant for bikes to be. Like, this is, you can actually get around without having to be kind of weighed down by all of those extra stresses of feeling of, planning and the danger and the stress. There's also just a tremendous sense of belonging. The Portland has really done an incredible amount of placemaking. And so this picture on the left was just one example of many of the delightful little places I encountered while I was riding around and exploring, where the community has really gotten involved and is really embracing the beauty and uniqueness of the spaces that they have that are one of a kind in Portland. And then this picture was a little bit later in the week. Every Wednesday throughout the summer, they're doing a big bike socializing. They started kind of happy hour time, and then there were a bunch of rides that left from that location around 6:30 or so. And then some people just stayed and continued to hang out and enjoy their time together. And then this was also like this feeling of being cared for. There are so many environments. I not only ride my bike, but I also walk around a lot. And there's just so many environments where the infrastructure tells you, you don't belong here, and in fact, we don't even care how you're doing, right? When there's no sidewalks, there's no bike infrastructure, there's actually just no way to get around unless you have a car. And it was just really an incredible feeling of being in spaces like this where, I would leave the hotel, or we would leave the university campus and hop on our bikes, and it was like there is a space for us, and somebody actually cares about how we're doing and how we experience the space. And then finally, just really hugely inspiring location. Portland has a lot of really beautiful architecture, a lot of artistic activity, but I also especially like this bridge. I spent several years of my life in an academic setting, and this just like gave me goosebumps to see the motto on the bridge. This is on the Portland State campus. Let knowledge serve the city if you can't see it from where you're sitting. And it also reflects, I mean, it's a great aspiration, but it also, I think, reflects like the orientation of PSU toward Portland is that the research and education that they do is really serves the city, right? It's not just isolated in its own little thing. They really work to get out in the city and engage with the community and build things and improve things for the community. And kind of along those lines, how did Portland come to be such a great place for biking? There's really three big pieces that were emphasized by the instructors in our group who know the city. There's the research and collaboration piece. Bikeway design, like all traffic, transportation planning and engineering, is at heart, very data-driven, technical. You really need to be prepared to dive into data and research, and having Portland State University there with people and professors and students who are highly invested in improving our systems has been a huge driver in Portland co-developing with the infrastructure it has. Another component, of course, is community activism and people asking for more, expecting more, and then getting out and making it happen. And that, of course, is also tied closely to political will. Our instructors did say it, because I was kind of like, how did this turn out like this? And they're like, we just had some key people in the right place at the right time who are highly committed to making this happen. I stacked those up kind of as a list, but it would have been good to draw them sort of as an interacting sort of circle shape, right? Because they all interface and reinforce each other. But so when we think about what do we do in our own community, all those pieces are tied together. When we put effort into community activism and advocacy, that helps drive the political will. It helps bring more people into the circle, and it also helps, create a space where we can say, bring data to the table, bring in experts, and come up with the best designs for our own situations. So then talking about the research and education piece, so these acronyms, we're starting to get into the acronyms here. So TREC is a Transportation Research and Education Center, which is based in Portland State University. IBPI is one of their major programs. So the B is for bike, and P is for pedestrian, and then it's bracketed on either side by initiative and innovation. So IBPI is one of their groups, focused around that, the bike and ped aspect of the overall transportation piece. So then the Bikeway Design Workshop was initiated in 2009, and it's been held every year since then. They typically have, like a meaningful but also a focused group, 15 to 20 people. Many of them are planners and traffic engineers, which is brilliant. So people come from all over the country, and then they can take that knowledge back to their own regions. And I also just wanted to say thank you to Do Good for the scholarship support for myself, and also for all the other people from Cincinnati who have been sent, the greater Cincinnati region, who have been sent to the workshop, because it's really a process of like leveling up the knowledge and understanding to bring the best learning to our region. All right, and then this is just a quick overview of who our instructors were for this particular program. I just wanted to highlight a couple things, which is one, how we were so fortunate to really be tied into the Portland Bureau of Transportation, so we're being instructed by the people who are in the trenches doing the work. Nick Falbo, Senior Transportation Planner, Roger Geller, Bicycle Coordinator for PBOT. They did much of the lectures. They were probably like the core lecture presenters. How Hagedorn is the Associate Director at Trek, and she was a major coordinator of the overall program. And then on the right, we had additional instructors who came in for some more focused pieces. But again, there's just a tremendous depth, more City of Portland, Washington County, which is next to Portland, which provided a view into some of the challenges working in a suburban environment, a much more spread out environment. And then the last two people work for consulting organizations, and so they work on a lot of design projects that are really high level. And then this is just a quick overview of our schedule, so you have a sense of what we covered. And I like to tell people this was like the best workshop ever, because we'd spend like half the day in lecture and half the day riding our bikes all over the city. Really can't get any better than that. Monday morning, we sat down and talked about the overall context of how do you think about bike facility design. And there's really, lots of questions, but when you want to distill it into like big conceptual themes, there's who are you designing this for? Really important considerations are safety and comfort and consistency of the experience. So say like filling in gaps in the network, or if someone starts out on their neighborhood path or trail, that they can have their 10-year-old son or daughter with them, and then but maybe 2 miles later they're like abandoned in some kind of traffic hellscape. Like that would not be a consistent experience. And about actors are in any of those locations, have a huge impact on how do you choose the right type of facility for that particular location. So first we'll talk about the who question. So when this question comes up of who are you designing for, I think many of us most all of us probably ride our bikes around the city. So we personally probably have a different image of who a cyclist is. But if you look in media or advertising, magazines, you tend to see a lot of featuring of like the recreational cyclist, or the person who's just really bold and just rides in any kind of situation. But the fact is people who have that kind of personality and riding style are a very tiny percentage of the overall population. So if you look at any group of people, this can be in the US, it can be in Europe, you typically see a sort of distribution sort of like this, where you have, a few percent who fit in that strong and fearless category. They're going to ride their bikes come hell or high water. It doesn't really matter whether there's infrastructure there or not. They're going to figure it out and make it work. Then you have a several percentage of people who are enthused and confident. So this group of riders will go the extra mile to make it happen and figure things out. But they also have a limit that is like, I'm not going to use that road, I'm not going to use that one, I'm not going to use that one because it's just too dangerous or unenjoyable. And then you have a very large percentage of people who are interested but concerned. They're not riding their bikes even though they want to, because they feel too much traffic stress, too much danger. There's too many obstacles to connect from one place to another. You got to sit down and study maps for hours to find a safe way through. And that is a huge untapped group of people who want to be riding their bikes, but it's the infrastructure that is getting in the way. So I actually copied this. It's actually a little copy paste from our lecture notes. So this is coming on high from our instructors, is to really think about guiding principle is don't plan for cyclists, plan for the people who aren't riding yet, but they want to. And how can we speak to their needs in the infrastructure choices? And this is some visuals that give you a sense of how types of infrastructure relate to these kind of broad categories of rider that we're talking about. So numerically, these are backwards, but they matched up with that figure from the lecture notes. So you have level of traffic stress 4. You can imagine what that's like. Heavy trucks, lots of traffic. You're pushed out on the shoulder. It's probably going to be areas where you have no way through but to jump back in the lane. Very uncomfortable and literally dangerous. Level of stress 3. Comfortable, confident bicyclists, but not everybody's cup of tea. And then the 1 and 2, I mean, when you just look at them, you're like, yeah, that would be so nice. Wouldn't that be so enjoyable to ride in those environments? And when I ride Pleasant Streets, which is the group ride that Fraser and I organize and lead out of Pleasant Ridge twice a month, you know, I really look for those level of traffic stress 1 and 2. In Cincinnati, we have a lot of streets like that, but they're not always connected together. And you have to spend a lot of time figuring out how to piece them together, or is there a little opening in a chain link fence somewhere at the back of a parking lot where you can sneak through, or, you know, there's often places you can get through, but sometimes there's not, and so. But when you can have that level of traffic stress 1 and 2, then you can really start to bring in and welcome people who have been there all the time wanting to ride, but just haven't been because of the stress and danger. And then this is just another way of kind of thinking about that interested but concerned group. And it also speaks to equity and maybe how there's people we don't see when we're thinking about who are bikers. Ranging from children, seniors, women, bike share, people of color, low-income riders, people with disabilities, cargo. And then you have the confident cyclist. And so you can see it's like often the confident cyclist is the person who comes to mind, but in fact they are just a small percentage of the broad group of people who can and want to and deserve to be able to ride their bikes, whether it's for fun or for transportation. And then this was put in our lecture notes. This is from Portland's comprehensive plan. So this is their actual language in their plan. It's their policy on an accessible bike system. Create a bicycle transportation system that is safe, comfortable, and accessible to people of all ages and abilities. So that's what they're shooting for. Portland, like any city, it's a work in progress. So, you know, you're not going to see this level at every single piece of bike infrastructure they have. But I think it's really important to kind of step back and think about how powerful those words are. Because do we even, you know, dare to expect that most of the time? Because we're generally immersed in this car-dependent, car culture kind of infrastructure where it's like that's the water we swim in, and to even say, no, you know what, it should just be normal to have infrastructure that all ages and all abilities can get around on bikes. And maybe I want to be sure to fit this point in somewhere, maybe this is a good place to put it, is obviously we're talking about bikeway design right now, but there's loads and loads of evidence that show when you introduce the features that make bikeways accessible and safe, in the process you also actually benefit everybody. So there are changes in the infrastructure that then make it safer for pedestrians, make it safe for people who are using, you know, strollers or wheelchairs or any other type of rolling device. And notably, the streets also become safer for drivers. So it's not just about bikers getting what they want. Actually, these types of changes make it better for everybody. So that's a little bit about the who. So then when we talk about the where and the what, you know, then you start to get into some of the more technical pieces, and I'm going to start diving into some of that. This is like a deep, deep field. There's, you know, we spent 4.5 days talking about this in this workshop. books, journal articles, there's tons of stuff. So I'm just going to kind of scratch the surface, but I want to at least give you some sense of what kinds of features are possible that maybe we just don't know about. Because I saw a whole bunch of stuff in Portland I had not seen or had only seen in photos but not experienced in real life. So here's another statement from Portland's comprehensive plan. Their goal is to create conditions that make bicycling more attractive than driving for most trips of approximately 3 miles or less. And so that's a really powerful way to put it, because when you think about, is it easier to bike? If it's easier to bike, people will bike, right? We're practical. And tying this to Cincinnati, over half of all trips in Hamilton County are under 3 miles. Over half of all trips are under 3 miles. Isn't that amazing? And 28% are under 1 mile. And when we think about Portland has some other aspirations and statistics that they aim for. There's this term, it's called bike use share. So it's basically like what to go on their bikes. And so Portland, depending what part of the city you look at and what year you're looking at, they're generally getting about 6 to 12% bike share, which is amazing, actually. In the Netherlands, they'll typically have up to 28% bike share, or bike use shares. I guess I got to use the whole term, so it doesn't sound like red bike use share. And then in Cincinnati, we're lucky if we have 1 or 2%. So it means we have a lot of space we can improve into. And it's so achievable. I mean, 3 miles, right? It's not even a big time commitment to go 3 miles. Solves a lot of problems of parking, cost of car ownership, lots of benefits. One thing, and again, I am not a traffic engineer myself nor an urban planner. I have a science background, but not in these fields. One thing that so impressed me about Portland, and I guess I'm saying I'm not a professional in this field because this may be done more in every city than I realize, and this might have just been my first exposure to it, but I was very impressed with how Portland systematically characterizes its roadways and looks at then what kind of, what is physical features and how can we categorize it? And then those categorizations then help drive decisions around what types of improvements do we make to that infrastructure. And here you can see blue, major city bikeway, functioning sort of as an arterial would in auto speak. And then the city bikeways are more like collectors. So they're feeding into the major city bikeways. And then they literally have, this is from their pedestrian design guide, they literally have every street characterized in depth. And again, I don't know if this is done everywhere, but it's really powerful. So I know the legend's a little small, but when you look at blue, they've got local service roads. But then what's really great is that they also characterize where maybe what's kind of a local service road becomes like a community main street, because those regions definitely have different characteristics and needs than just your purely residential area. So you can see how they've got some of these transitions here, like here's a red section, here's a neighborhood corridor, kind of alternates between these two. You've got your community corridors, and then you have lots and lots and lots of quiet blue local service streets that are connecting into those. So you sort of have the local streets connected to collector streets, connected to more arterial type bikeway infrastructure. All right, so going from that kind of as this high level of thinking about how do you sort of have a plan, how do you know what you're dealing with, kind of get your hands around what are the locations, physical features, functional features of the different roadways that already exist in the city, then what types of bikeways or treatments, signaling, infrastructure design are then appropriate for those locations. And I want to really spend some time, especially on the first two, because I think there's, well, the first two, there's tons of potential to bring these types of treatments to Cincinnati. The third one I'd like to spend more time on, but it's highly technical and detailed, and we could spend like a whole day just talking about that and even just scratch the surface. But the neighborhood greenways are sort of like those more local, quiet streets that are designated as being part of the bicycle network. They already come with some quieter characteristics or potential to be quieter, calmer streets. Once they're brought into the network, then you can systematically think about how they connect to other features within the network. And then protected bike lanes are a crucial element in the comfort and safety of the overall network. So as we all know, there are going to be areas within every city where there's higher traffic volume and higher speeds. And so you want to be able to provide enough safety for people that they're comfortable riding on that type of infrastructure. And then signaling and intersection design really bring together visibility, safety, harmonious flow, and notably, like, just really deeply reflect the priorities of the community. So during one part of our session, we were talking in depth about signaling and whatnot, and so I was like, I raised my hand and I'm like, if someone goes up to an intersection and like presses the street crossing button, like, what do you guys think is a good amount of time, the wait? Like, what's fair? And he's like, what are your priorities? What are your community's priorities? Who has to wait longer? Right? And like, we don't normally like think about it that way because we're just used to like pressing that button and waiting and then pressing it and waiting and pressing it, and we're standing on the rain and it's cold and snowy and we're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And it's like so much of that, like, again, these messages is like, are you welcome here? Do we care? Do you belong? And also, how do we make it easy? And if it's like you have this, it's all of this, like the priorities and these design choices make it hard, what are people going to do? They're going to drive, even if they want to bike or walk. So yeah, I got louder. Thanks. So yeah, let's dive into the neighborhood greenways. This is one photo of a typical neighborhood greenway. If you ever have a chance to go to Portland, like, I highly recommend just riding around and just enjoying how beautiful these are. A couple features you can see in the photo are they use sharrows, but the sharrows are not like, hey, bikes legally have a right to be here and just try not to run them over with your car. The sharrows are not serving that function in the neighborhood greenways. The sharrows are really like a wayfinding. It's like if you see the sharrows running down the center of the street, you know you're on a neighborhood greenway. That is designed for bikes. It's not that it's just that we're telling drivers to not be so mean. It means that you're on a street that's designed with bikers in mind. The other thing you'll see are a lot of speed cushions. Portland loves speed cushions. But if it's a neighborhood greenway, they have very specific speed targets. The other thing that's notable is, there's not a ton of modifications. Properties were the way they were, and people's properties are not encroached upon. It's rather there's other tools used to control the flow of traffic and the amount of traffic on these streets so that they remain comfortable places and safe places to ride a bike. And then this is just a really nice overview of how extensive the neighborhood greenway system is. So this is actually a pretty zoomed out map, but you can see here's that bend in the river, in the Willamette River, where we're looking at kind of the downtown features before. There's the airport way up there, so you can see this is really covering a broad area. And it might be a little bit hard to see in the slide, but you have like your greenways, and then you can also see where the really useful features like multi-use paths, to bike lanes. There's a bunch of bike lanes here. You can see, so you can see some of the interconnection even within that focus on the neighborhood greenways. So key features of neighborhood greenways, low traffic volumes, low speeds, easy crossing. So you can see Portland has a lot of grid features, so you are going to be crossing other streets. They really work to make that easy. Wayfinding, those sharrows were one feature. They also do a lot of signs that show, library, half a mile, turn left here, or, business district this way, So they help you find your way around even if you haven't carefully pre-planned or aren't carrying a map with you. And then there's tons of treatments that prioritize people on bicycles, which we'll get into some of those. Some of them are about just controlling volume, also speed. There's bike boxes, prominent markings. And then over here I included actually the harder numbers on what is meant by low speed and low volume. So the speed that they're aiming for is that the 85th percentile speed is about 20 miles per hour. Automobile volumes, their goal is about 1,000 cars on the average day. You can go up to 2,000 as the max. But if it gets over 2,000, then it's like, okay, it's time for an intervention. And then they have a bunch of tools in their toolbox to control that.
What do they do?
We'll get into that. Yes, I know. But I appreciate you asking, because that's the thing. It's like it's an active process, right? It's not just because of the hand of fate and geography and ownership that this happens to be a quiet street. It's like, no, that is managed as a quiet street. Calm street. And then we had that beautiful photo before, but then this is just kind of a conceptual view that helps reinforce some of those points. And then labeled, you can see speed management tools, pavement markings, wayfinding, bicycle priority, crossing improvements. So these are all the kinds of things that you will see when you ride on these neighborhood greenways. All right. Okay. So I put that the targets up on the upper left. Speed thing is really about safety. A collision with an automobile, 20 miles per hour, 1 out of 10 people will not survive that collision. But once you get up to 40 miles per hour, hit by a car. So slower speeds are safer speeds. And then on this side, this was so impressive. This is on that street, and how fast is it going? Adjust and monitor and adjust until they get right. So to your question, Gina, so speed management is one part of that. So these are some tools. There are more, but these are some of the more common ones. Pinch points. This is just one example. There's many creative variations on this depending on the particular geometry of the street and intersection, but where drivers, instead of having just this continuously wide open space, there's features that are put in that narrow the roadway and cause people to slow down. There's also speed cushions. This is one example. This particular kind, they did a whole study on this, which I was like, you guys are so great. Was there like, what kind of speed cushions do bikers like? Vehicle speed relative to biker speed was bikers didn't have to slow down. They could keep going, but cars would like slow down at every speed bump. There's another strategy called a chicane, which is where it's an intentional introduction of like a curve in the roadway. And sometimes those exist naturally, but they can also be created with landscaping islands or just, type of islands. And then Portland has also used mini traffic circles. This was maybe my one disappointment in the whole lecture, was that they said, we're kind of steering away from those. And I just sort of have a soft spot for these because they usually have trees on them, they're landscaped, they're pretty. They really lend a beautiful view to the street that because there's just not a huge amount, don't tend to be reduced by the traffic lanes or speed cushions. And they take a lot of maintenance. I think that's the biggest thing, is the tree maintenance and the, the things that trees leave on the ground and whatnot. And then volume management, a couple slides, but there are so many streets. So if someone needed to get down that street, maybe they're moving or there's an emergency vehicle coming through or something. Like, it's physically possible to get through that street, but the signage is telling you not to. And then you can see local residents have their cars there, and meanwhile we got bikers going in and out. There's also lots of different schemes for a full closure. So there's tons of these signs around Portland. Do not enter except bicycles. I kind of feel like it should also say pedestrians as well, but it's very clear the roadway. You have a physical structure here that is actually preventing cars from coming through, but there's nice open passage for bikes. There's some setups like this where it's a semi-diversion, so the car traffic can come out in one direction and then turn left or right, but not go straight. And so those are really good for preventing like cut-through traffic. Local residents can get in and out of what they need to do, but you don't have if the main thoroughfare is set up a certain way with signal timing and whatnot, you don't have people hopping onto that street one block down and blasting through, because there's structures in place that prevent them from doing that. And then this kind of structure here can be an example of what if you were sitting in this car here looking this way, you might be looking at something like this, where there's like a physical median through, but a car cannot. And then these are particularly beautiful. These are nice where if you have a kind of like a T-type intersections, you can create where it's like different types of diagonal diverters. Sometimes they're these kind of big blocks, bollard-type blocks. Other times there'll be landscaping with like a passage that goes through. But this is a way, again, of preventing cut-through traffic, and it's really attractive. But people who are walking, pushing a stroller, riding their bike, free to go through. So it really brings the accessibility for people who actually live there, as opposed to people just cutting through because they want to take, 30 seconds off their commute. All right, and then another management piece is the street crossings. So I hadn't seen these before. Portland uses a lot of these. They call them cross bike, part of the street, and set up high visibility and make it safer and easier for people to cross. Visible. Drivers sort of learn go with the visual signals on the pavement and are prepared to expect to see bikers. And this kind of crossing, it seemed from that they're kind of continuing to monitor and learn from this, but it seems like these work okay for roadways up to kind of the minor collector level, vehicles per day. Seems like they are still working okay.
Did you feel like motorists were hostile to bicyclists like they are here?
Nope.
Or how do they deal with it there?
Nope.
They're okay.
Most of them. We did a lot of riding, and I also did a lot of riding, in addition to what we did as part of the class. And so, I'm trying to think how to normalize that per hours. But there was, I would say, one aggressive driver and one pretty annoyed driver. And everybody else was nice.
Wow.
So much of it is the speeds, too. The speeds are so much lower. And boy, that makes a difference.
Yeah.
It's like riding in like the downtown area, because they have some streets have bike lanes and some streets don't. Because I was new, and plus I was just kind of exploring, I would sometimes just go on a street and I was like, boy, this is easy. Like, boy, this feels so great compared to, and it was like not even the street that had the bike lane, but just because the traffic speed was lower. And they also do a lot with their signaling. They have a lot of traffic signals, especially in the downtown area. They have a lot of them, but then they have them on short cycles. And so what happens is people end up just kind of flowing through. They find their speed. Maybe they pause for a few seconds and then they go again. And so it seems to reduce that like racing to the next light and then having to sit at that light for 2 minutes and then racing to the next light. It's like it just sort of keeps on gently flowing through. For major street crossings, to make it easier and safer to cross, they'll tend to use, and this is photos from Minneapolis, but there are a lot of features like this. This is from the lecture notes. But there'll be a lot of median refuges that also often double as diverters. And median refuges are so great. You know, when you have a larger, busier street, you can cross it in 2 parts. And then they also are working on installing the Hawk system, the flashing beacons. Those tend to be pretty expensive, and you know, it's a whole more complex setup and stuff. But those are used in certain situations, often around schools, areas where they want to really just take that safety up another notch. And then this last one that's sort of in the street crossing diverter kind of concept. I really like these because, you know, in Cincinnati we have so many of these like dogleg street crossings. And then and I'll often plan my routes so that I'm like turning right, or like when I'm in the traffic, I turn left and then I turn right, so I don't have to sit in traffic, which means I ride, you know, certain areas clockwise and certain areas counterclockwise, depending on. And I'm like, this is so great. So I think you guys can appreciate, like, if you come out here, you'll come out, and then you got a protected area to wait, and then you can turn. And meanwhile, because this also creates kind of a pinch point, especially this design where it's got the diverters in it, it'll encourage drivers to slow down. So you get kind of a double win there. All right, so yeah, so just sort of some reflections on Cincinnati. You know, we have a lot of naturally quiet neighborhood streets that I certainly take advantage of them, and I know a lot of other people do too. But the challenge is they often, if you're going somewhere, you often, en route, need to intermix with other streets that have a lot higher traffic stresses. So, you know, stepping back, you know, I think really thinking with the network hat on is to think about designating streets that are suitable for neighborhood greenways and actively managing them as opposed to just sort of having them sort of passively emerge. And then also wayfinding was a really nice feature. I ended up finding out, like, by, I don't know, day 3 out of that week. I'm used to Cincinnati people who know me know I am like a hardcore route planner. Yeah. And riding around Cincinnati, I like put a plan together before I go. I mean, and there's places I know now, but you know, any place that's slightly new, I'll be like, I want to figure out the best way to get there. After a few days in Portland, I was kind of like, okay, I want to get over to this area. I'll just go, and I know I can find my way because things are marked so well, because you're wayfinding, because you know there's going to be a safe place to ride. It's like such a reduction in the obstacle to riding and getting around. All right, so then I'd like to move on to protected bike lanes for a little bit here. And I'll try to go through these fast. I know I've been commenting and just see the time there. But before we dive into protected bike lanes, I just want to get us sort of on the same page with terminology. Bike lane discussions, even among professionals, can sometimes be a little vague with the terms that are used, and so then, you know, it can start to feel a little mushy about what means what. So this is kind of the best I can do in terms of explaining the terms that are used. So this kind of bike lane we are all familiar with, and that's just called a bike lane, or a standard bike lane, or a conventional bike lane. It's just paint on pavement. You've got a designated space. That's a standard bike lane. The buffered bike lane gives you some lateral separation, and we have some of these in Cincinnati as well. It gives you some lateral separation, but a buffered bike lane does not include any vertical components. In contrast, a protected bike lane will have some kind of combination of a lateral separation and also a vertical protective component. It might not actually be something that can physically stop a car, but it is a vertical component in that whole equation. Types here, this style is, typically adapted for, it's called a retrofit, where you have an existing roadway. It's got the curbs, it's got the draining, it's got all the things. It's not being rebuilt, it's just getting really desirable and safe option. And then sort of the ultimate is a dedicated cycle track, separated bike lane. This example is a two-way. It doesn't necessarily have to be a two-way, but what's distinct is that it is completely separated from the street. It's got the separation, it's got curbs. This might be, these can be street level or they can be sidewalk level, depending on money and space and all those things. So protected bike lanes, they create a low stress facility in a high stress environment. So these are from the lecture notes, but I think they were nice examples. Like, clearly, high stress. Another example of, all this stuff going on, but the bikers have a place to go.
Are those green spaces, those are bike boxes?
They are, and like this one is, actually I'll show a better picture of it later, but this is called a Copenhagen left. It's kind of like a special box to wait in while you're waiting to turn left. So, features that you're aiming to accomplish with protected bike lanes are continuous protection as much as possible. Obviously, there's going to be brakes, but you want to maximize the protection. Sufficient width, safe intersections, all the things you need for roadway functions, and if they're flexible or modifiable so you can respond, that's even better. All right, so kind of the creme de la creme is the sidewalk level protected bike lanes. We actually rode on this one during the class, and this was really cool. This was in a new area that had just been developed. It was in the city, but it was some newly available land, and so they decided to put in the full feature. You can see the curb, separation here, and then this is for pedestrians, and this is for bikes. You've got the diagram, and I just included this so you can see, kind of get a sense of some of the widths that are involved. There's like multiple series of these. This might be 10 feet or 11 feet or 12 feet, depending on who else needs to be using this roadway. These might be 6 or 7 or 8 feet. There's variations in those, but ultimately, the designers will be looking at, like, what's the total width I have to work with, and how can I divide it up, based on the functions of the structure. And then there's a lot going on in this diagram, but what I just quickly want to show is what's so great about these sidewalk level protected bike lanes is that they prevent these types of intermixing. So you can see you got like the bus stop, you've got the driveway, you've got parking or loading. You're still going to have a driveway here, but it's going to be a more attention-getting experience for the driver. And then functions like the loading and the bus and so forth can be just carried out in a separate space. Whereas in this case, where you have a more typical, like this is a buffer bike lane with some protection further down, but you've got a lot of interruptions into that space. Lots of mixing zones, a lot of interaction. So sidewalk level protected bike lane is like creme de la creme, but a lot of times it's just not possible because the city can only do a retrofit in that particular situation. And then these are just some types of protected bike lanes. I'm going to go through these photos really quickly here, but you've got delineators, traffic separators. But anyway, I'll describe them as we get to them. Okay, so delineator protected, we're familiar with these in Cincinnati. We got different types. You can have just posts in the ground, or there's some situations where something called a tough curb is appropriate. These can be actually like glued onto the roadway. And so if you're like on a bridge and you can't drill into the bridge, like Matt knows, these tough curbs can be a good solution. Portland uses a lot of what they call traffic separators. These look a lot there. This is parking protected. So you have all these cars parked here. This area here, this is a nice wide one, and they call this the step-out zone. And then you have the bike lane. This, to me, was probably the biggest surprise. This was like the feature I least expect before you get to the intersection if someone's thinking about doing a right turn or changing lanes. There's planter protected bike lanes. These are really beautiful. Really attractive, especially for like business districts or dining districts. They take some extra maintenance and attention, but for neighborhoods that are committed to the aesthetics of their particular area, these are really nice. And they're big and heavy. And then we actually rode on this road, or on this bikeway. This is really quiet in this photo, but when we were there, man, it was jammed with cars, and they were moving fast. And it was so nice to have these big Jersey barriers there. It felt very safe. So that's an appropriate type of solution if you have a bikeway next to a high-speed, high-volume roadway. And then here's kind of an overview in terms of thinking about when should you choose a protected bike lane and what might be appropriate. And I found this graphic really quite stunning when I reflected on what we have in Cincinnati, the road speeds and the traffic volumes. So where it's kind of whited out, that's where it's appropriate for that kind of solution. So no bike lane or no protections, slower speeds, slower volumes. As you get into this 30-ish, 35 miles per hour, you really want to have at least a bike lane, like a standard bike lane, better if it's buffered. And then as you get over 35 miles an hour, or you're over 7,000 vehicles per day, really the most appropriate solution is a separated bike lane or a shared use path or protected bike lane. And I felt like that was really where there's just this really huge difference with what we actually have here in Cincinnati. Now again, for the confident, fearless cyclist, those riders, which include many of you in this room, are going to ride on those roads whether they have, the features that make them bike friendly or not. But what's really considered best practice for creating a network that's truly available and accessible to all ages, all abilities, you're looking at these kind of standards. And then this very busy table, I will just point out what I want to feature here, but this is like a text and more detailed version of this same kind of information. So it's basically looking at speeds, and then volumes, and then what is the recommendation. And one thing you'll see here is, if you got super slow speeds, super low volumes, you can just share the whole street, just passively. You don't have to worry about actively managing it. Bicycle boulevards, which are also the neighborhood greenways, same things. Again, like those goals or targets that we were looking at before, slow speeds, slow volumes. But then as you get over 25 miles per hour or get over, 2,000 vehicles per day, protected bike lane, protected bike lane, protected bike lane, protected bike lane, separated, protected bike lane. So it's really the contemporary standard for making the bikeways safer and more accessible. And we really don't have that kind of combination here. Oh, Cora, do you have the clicker's not working? Ah, there we go. Okay. So lesson for Cincinnati, as I just said, there's many, many streets in Cincinnati that are essential to connectivity. There's so many places, there's not an alternate way to go. Have to get across that expressway, or you have to get through that hillside or across that river or creek. By modern guidelines, we really should have a higher level of bike infrastructure. And one thing I found really interesting is, so ODOT has what they call their Transportation Information Mapping System, which is on GIS. And it is just amazing to go and look at how the network is, the features of the network. So I took just a couple of screenshots because I wasn't computer interaction for this talk. But this is the GIS view, and where they have character. You got Spring Grove here, got Reading Road coming down, we got Montgomery Road, Madison. Those are all principal arterials as far as ODOT is concerned. Green is minor arterials, and then pink and yellow are collectors, so major and minor collectors. And so when you think of, when you look at those and start to track back, if you hop on this map yourself, and I have the link is in the slides, you can start to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's a higher speed roadway, and there's always lots of cars on it. And it was designed that way, so like that's good. We know what it's designed for, it's intended for, but then how can we integrate our biking with it, right? The other feature you can access on this GIS map is look at these numbers here. 10K at the top, 5K. All right, I'm going to forward here. So we got our traffic counts. So Madison Road here, 1,000. And we put sharrows on it.
This is per day, yeah? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Riverside Drive, 8,000. Okay. A little bit out of the scope of a standard bike is Madison with sharrows on it.
Not Burford either.
Yeah. There's get past that section that has a bike lane and you're climbing the rest of the way up the hill. Not so great. It's also kind of fun to look at these numbers and pull out some of the streets that I like to take. Like this green one here is Highland. I often take that instead of Gilbert when I'm going up the hill. It's about 1,500. So the numbers are pretty cool. And it's kind of fun. Like if you're thinking, hey, I want to choose, I want to go from OTR down to the riverfront. Like what's the best street to take given our current state of infrastructure? You'd be like, well, you could take Sycamore, which has about 5,000 to 6,000 vehicles. Or you could take Race, which has half as many. I don't know. Yeah, right? Yeah. All right, and then so I know it's getting late, so I'm just going to hop through this really quick here. Signaling, intersection design. We talked about this a bit already. These are design decisions that really reflect your priorities and who do you want to have the easiest and most enjoyable, safest time while they're out there. This is just some example, and again, I know we're running late, so I'll kind of skim through this stuff, but this is just kind of some examples of what designers think about while they're thinking about how do we make these intersections better. And so one example would be this kind of setup where what you're really relying on is the signaling to create safety so that you don't get like right hooks or you don't get other types of dangerous bike vehicle interactions. These other three are more like physical controls. So you can set it up where it's got a mixing zone. The dashed line means a mixing zone where bikes and cars are moving into the bike space. So here's one type of mixing zone. Or you can say, hey, we don't want a mixing zone at all. We're going to set this up with like a curb protected bike lane that sweeps out and then moves forward that way. Or you could have what they call separated crossing, and again, you got parking here and parking there, right? So there's some similarities in these, but here you're keeping the bikes to the right, but then you push out like a kind of island here. So this can be like a really great solution if there's an area with a lot of pedestrians who also want to cross that street.
Quick question about the GIS data you showed. Technically interesting.
Yeah.
Is that dynamic? Could I ask what the traffic volume is, say, at 8 a.m. versus noon?
That would be amazing. To my knowledge, it's not. I think it's just.
Collected, I don't think so.
I think it's just summarized.
They collect it with the rubber hose.
Is the rate? Yeah.
More real time.
Yeah. Do you know, Matt? I know you've done a lot of traffic count stuff. Have you? Is there?
We have it on ours, but I think you'd have to contact ODOT and
Yeah.
Put that way, but they don't put it out.
Yeah, they don't present it that way. Yeah. All right, so, getting back to like this intersection design, Portland has quite a few intersections like this with mixing zones. And they can be just fine if you have a low speed urban condition where people are expecting and they know there's a lot going on and they're kind of looking around and paying attention and going slowly. But if this is a street where lots and lots of cars want to turn right onto this street, not a good solution. And then here's some photos of what those look like. These do feel they feel a little freaky actually. I didn't really care for these completely open mixing zones. I would do a lot of like, you could see it on the pavement and then I'd be like checking to be like, okay, who's back there? These actually felt a lot more comfortable because the driver's being kind of guided into a very specific location and they're not going to go in there and then go back out just because they're wandering around in their lane. They're going to choose to go into that zone. And then I have some that are really complicated. This is one of their big bridges, and so there's a lot going on with, turns and directions and stuff afterward. In this case, they use the cross bike concept to help facilitate these mixing areas. And so you have bikers who are riding along here, and then if they want to turn right, they could go here, but if they want to go straight, they got to come out here. Meanwhile, you got cars turning right. So there's a lot that goes on in intersections, and those are some ways to handle them. And then real quick on the separated crossing, this has the feature of the island here where pedestrians can wait. And then this is just a little more detail about what can go into setting that up. And then I just wanted to include this photo because this is what they call a separated crossing protected intersection on the cheek. And so if you picture that kind of island space, they made that with paint, and then they used a big old thing with a sign in it to basically create the turning radius. Right? Yeah. All right, and then just in the interest of time, I'm going to fly through these, but this is a series of photos that talks about driveways and minor streets. I think we experienced this in Cincinnati quite a bit where, I've heard people complain about the multi-use path on Eggleston because there's all those driveways coming out of those parking lots and stuff that people just fly across it. So there's features that can be included like color and especially ramps and closing in the space so that drivers sort of have to notice that there's a bike crossing there. So these are some examples out in the real world, elevated with a cross bike. So then people coming in and out of this driveway also have to roll up into a ramp. Some more examples. You can see it. I'm guessing there's like a parking garage over here. So again, it ramps up for the bike lane. Cars need to go across all this, right? So it's like, there's no way they're not going to see that. Another example there, another view of this kind of ramped up structure. And then this will be a quick series of slides that is building on the same kind of concept with ramping up and using color and sort of changing the sides of the shape to really get drivers' attention. And I'm just going to go through these like a card deck. But what you'll see is we're starting with something that's like almost your typical crossing. If you imagine this is a driveway or a minor street, maybe it's a parking garage down there. That's pretty common, except of course they've got the cross bike there as well, which is pretty sweet. But geometrically, it's pretty normal, right? So let's look at what we can do here. If you want a center island, you can go with that. If there's a lot of pedestrians, or you can set it up like this. Make a small crossing distance. So everything's still taking up the same amount of space, But now, so this is all unchanged out here, but you've brought the curb out. So then if you want to ramp this up, it'll mesh with the curb, but you also have all this separated and protected. And shorter crossing distances and a pinch point. And so I'm just showing you the original there again compared to that. Kind of like if you've never seen it or thought like what can you do, but once you can see what are some of the interventions, then you can start to think about where can we use things like that. If you want to take it to the next level, let's say this was installed originally and there's still too many drivers going quickly through there. The next step would be to put that ramping and elevated kind of effect in that the cars need to go over as well. So then the final result would look something like that. So this is not blocked off, but it's a ramp, right? So they would need to ramp up, go up and over, and then back down. So that's what we began with, and that's the final. Big difference. All right. Oh, and then this is the Copenhagen left. This is, so, you know, often you left turn, it's like, where do I go, right? You can sit out here in traffic and just hang in traffic, which never feels good. Or you can go straight and then you can awkwardly wait over here, but then it's like, are you going to cross like a pedestrian? Are you going to cross like traffic, or what's happening? So this is from Copenhagen. It's a little bike box is created right there. And so if you're sitting in there, people know what you're planning on doing. And it gives you a little refuge. So here's some examples. Here's one that's painted on, and then here's one that also has some islands around it to really structure the vehicle movements.
Was it fairly intuitive as you approached the intersection what your options were as a cyclist?
Once I knew what it was, totally on it. The first day I was riding there and I was going on the street and I'm like, la-di-da-di-da, there was a left turn lane. I was la-di-da-di-da. And then as I'm about right here, I'm like, huh, wait, what's that over there? Like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, and then once I knew what it was, I'm like, oh, these are so great.
Right turn, U-turn, right turn, U-turn.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And let's see, okay, and then I'm just going to show you guys these real quick just because of the time, but you know, these are also really important features to look at. Some of these got me thinking about the new features that are going in on Central Parkway and the upper part of Central Parkway with the transit facilities that are being built, but different ways to incorporate smooth bike passage, safety for pedestrians who need to get to the bus, access, you know, ADA grade access, but then also make it so the buses can move through and everybody has their place and safe ways to move past each other. So there's some examples of how it can be incorporated. There are many, many, many ways that transit is integrated with bike lanes and streets. And then also thinking about, you know, a lot of urban streets have dedicated bus lanes. And so Portland has a variety of ways to handle that. Like sometimes it's separate and we're over here with the pedestrians. Sometimes we're behind the separator posts and kind of sharing the lane with it. And other times it's like the bike and the bus get to go on the same lane, which is pretty fun. Loading zones, kind of some parallel issues. Like, you know, often the loading zone is going to want like a sidewalk level platform to load onto. And so this example here, they ramp up the bike lane and then ride through and then ride back. So then this way, the person driving this truck can just do what they need to do and have some space to put their things and then go across. And there's no temptation to like just roll that van right up onto the bike lane. Well, they might think about it, but there's not much benefit to it. And then here's another example here, kind of similar, not as elaborate looking as this one, but similar concept of bringing the height up and making space for everybody. And then finally, you guys can study this, but this is kind of a summary of some of the features we've been talking about, really having to do with visibility and then separation, horizontal separation, vertical separation, and putting people and drivers in places where they can see each other. And then this was just one from Portland. This is a photo I caught, which is sort of a concept along these lines, which is like, it's like a corner hardening. It's not as extensive as trying to bring your curb out into the street, but it's a way you can keep the normal curb. Maybe school buses or fire trucks or other vehicles need to have that radius set the way it is already, but then you can put these hardening features in so that regular cars go and stay in their lane and go outside instead of cutting short and then having compromised visibility and being too close to everybody. So yeah, so overarching principles, like, and you've heard me say this a few different ways, but you know, when bikes and cars are intermingling, like the thing that's going to elevate the safety is visibility and slow speeds. If you have speeds greater than 25 miles per hour, like in general, you're going to be looking at some kind of more protected or separated facility. And then the design of the overall network is really critical, starting out with how do you classify your roadways and how do you think about how they logically interact through space in terms of where people need to go, and then start to, you know, appropriately manage them so they can function as arterials or collectors or these local streets. The same concept that's used for cars, but in this case we're thinking about it for bikes. And then once you've got that kind of context set and goals set for the roadways, then you can match the right design with the context. So thank you. Sorry I ran a little long. I really appreciate your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, we've got a mic here, so we'll take about 5-10 minutes of questions.
So here in Cincinnati, it feels like we got a lot of elected leaders on board, like 50% maybe are like really on board. But it feels like we're missing like a critical mass of just like the general public being really behind a lot of the pedestrian and bike safety initiatives. Were there any lessons from kind of how things changed coming from Portland in the 1980s to today about how they convinced just like people who don't care about walking or driving that maybe it's best for everyone as it is for there to be more options?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's no like single solution, but it's a lot of interrelated efforts. You know, as I mentioned earlier on, like there's a lot of placemaking, a lot of community building, and I think those types of activities will tend to draw people in who are not maybe thinking about, well, I want to walk 5 miles to get to wherever, but it's more like, I live in this amazing neighborhood and I want to connect with my neighbors and have a place to hang out. And then in the process, they end up walking from their home to the event. You know, maybe it's a closed street block party, or it's, you know, an art project, or it's, you know, and then it starts to kind of crack open that door of more active transportation. I think I did find that Portland was like very conscious of building a bike culture, and I think that connects to kind of like an overall larger, like an Okora here is really working on the outdoor culture theme. Because, you know, that's like the foundation of all of this, is to have it be like part of an expected and enjoyed and valued lifestyle, and not purely like utilitarian. And yeah, and I think continuously inviting people in. I think, you know, because people are, you know, subjected to dangers and frustrations being on the road, it can sometimes lead to sort of positioning that is like rawr, you know, like I'm mad about this and I'm mad about that and why is this broken and that. But I think to work on that culture where people are invited in to at least participate on some level, and then it starts that ball rolling, you know. I know with Queen City Bike we're doing a lot of activities, and I always want to be sure to include pedestrians in the conversation too, because it's like as this shirt says that I'm wearing, it's like streets are for people, right? And I think looking at all uses for people is what helps us get where everybody can win.
Awesome.
Thanks, Vincent.
What about parking? Does the city have requirements for new housing or new commercial spaces to include bicycle parking infrastructure? Do a lot of people use cargo bikes?
That is a great question. Jose, I wish I knew, like, on a deep technical level, the answer to that, which I don't, but I did see a lot of bike parking. Some of it, maybe my impression of a lot was partly because I was around the university quite a bit, but the university has some really nice facilities. One really cool thing was when we took the light rail, a lot of the light rail stations have, well, it's not all of them, but some of them are like really set up where you have like a mini pass and that kind of thing. So I feel like Portland is really aware of facilitating that, because it is a piece of the puzzle. It can be inconvenient, and you don't sometimes want to be worried about what's happening to my bike while you're inside doing the other thing, you know, or at work for a period of time. And the parking, we did talk about that. I have a bit of a superficial knowledge about it. I want to be careful I don't answer it wrong, because I haven't reviewed that recently. Sometimes my memory gets a little fuzzy, but I know that they are, like, broadly speaking, working on reducing the, changing the zoning so that you don't, every business doesn't have to have, you know, X number of spots that often are more physical space than the retail establishment itself, you know. I know they're working on stuff like that, and also, you know, again, that transit and the bike piece to be like, we can bring in high density activity without needing all these parking spaces because people are coming in through other means. So yeah, so sorry I can't give you a more like quantitative answer, but high level I know that it's an area that they're working on and not just like going with the status quo.
All right. Well, give it up for Kathy.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Jody says, leave with the food in your belly so she doesn't have to take it back on her bike. But feel free to mingle, and if anybody wants